special use clearance to consider. So that's Attorney Jeff to talk to us about that. Sure, right?
Okay, and before we get into the new business, my understanding is that, and I have read it, one of us, I understand, I've read a letter filed by a remonstrance represented by council that the Board of Zoning Appeals does not have jurisdiction to hear a petition tonight based on purported deficiency in the procedure of the Plan Commission and Town Council. It's going to be, that issue will be litigated. It's a position of the town attorney that that is not the case, and the Board of Zoning Appeals does have the authority to hear this petition tonight and give a thumbs up and thumbs down, or continue whatever you'd like to do tonight. But I think it is my position we're good to proceed, sir.
Okay, thank you. The next business of the evening is election of officers. Been president for a long time, and my term is ending, so I'll open it up for nominations for the president of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
I would make a motion that Tim will be our new president for the remainder of this year.
Bill, we accept the nomination?
Sure.
All in favor? Roll call?
Camp,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Herschel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Jeff.
And the vice president, we have a nomination for vice president. Make a motion for vice president.
Nominate Jeff Keith as vice president, vice chair.
Vice chair,
For the chair.
second vice. Jeff?
Yes.
All, and roll call?
Camp,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Herschel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Jeff.
Very
Mr.
good.
Chair, new chair, it's not on the agenda, but we do also need to nominate a secretary, and the secretary need not be a member of the BZA.
So we have nomination for the secretary of the BZA. I'll make a motion for Paul Lee. Do you have a second? I'll second.
Okay, roll call?
Camp,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Herschel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Jeff.
We will now turn the remaining of the meeting over to our new president. Tim?
You guys on here for adoption of minutes, I understand that you don't have copies of the minutes of this meeting, excuse me, to approve, so we will that until the next meeting. The old business, there is no old business, and then under new business, we have application BZA 2023-01. The subject is the review of special use application to the approved salvage yard special use in general industrial zoning district. The location is 6199 South Steeple 13, 0 South Steeple 13. Petitioners are LKQ Midwest Incorporated, represented by Randy Smith, and FNP-BC Advisors LLC, represented by Chris Farrar. Property owners are Carolyn L. Wilson and Wilson Land Trust, Carol Dick Wilson. So, I'm not exactly sure of our exact order of business here on this. I believe, Oksana, the county representative, will go first and give a presentation.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, if, based on the number of people with ties here today, there's a good chance this may not be the last proceeding for this. And one of Paula's responsibilities is to make a record. So if any of the board members ask questions or make comments during this, please speak in the microphone to help out with the recording. And anyone that would like to speak for or against the proceeding or the petition, please do the same. And for Paula's benefit, try to keep applause, things like that down if you all can, because it just goes back to the record at the end.
Okay. Please, first, guys.
Does everyone hear me? No? Somebody's- Oh, hold on. Does everyone hear me now? Awesome. It's always the on and off button. The subject site is located on the west side of State Road 13, about 975 feet south of the intersection of State Road 38 and State Road 13. The 102-acre subject site is comprised of 3 parcels, all in the same ownership, currently zoned general industrial, and they are used for farming currently. The surrounding zoning districts and uses can be seen in Exhibit 1. So this map shows both the current zoning districts around the subject site as well as the uses for that. And so we have pretty much mostly surrounded by the agricultural zoning district, except for to the northeast we have an institutional zoning district. To the east we have a general industrial zoning district. And then to the south, there is also an area zoned general industrial. The uses are around mostly agricultural or vacant land, and the uses here noted are per the property record. So whatever is stated to the auditor of Anderson County, these are what the uses currently are. The petitioner, LKQ Midwest, requests permission to conduct a salvage junkyard special use at the subject site. Specifically, it would like to conduct vehicle recycling and no storage operations indoors, and some storage outside. Exhibit 4, which is the site plan, shows the following planned improvements. A building with offices and indoor facilities for dismantling vehicles and storing vehicle parts and foods. It's 1,400 square feet, so about a 3-acre building. A parking lot to serve the offices with parking landscaping. A storage yard around the building and on the rest of the lot. An 8-foot tall metal fence to screen the storage yard around the entire perimeter of the yard. A planned landscape buffer outside of the fence. A drainage detention pond to the, let's say, west of the site, and a preserved floodplain area around the Sand Mud Creek that the construction won't encroach into on the west side of the project site. So the green area on the west side, this is where the floodplain is. This is where the hashed area just shows where the floodplain is. So that area is not going to be developed. The detention pond will be also outside of the floodplain. The gray area, stone yard, is where the storage of carcasses is gonna be. And then finally, we have the building close to the state road itself where dismantling is going to happen, where storage of pretty much all other parts, those parts of the vehicles is going to happen. understand the character of it. This is the front. This is, I think, the front on the other side. It also shows kind of the fence and the gate here. This is the front again. So these are specific kind of, these are improvements specific to the site that are proposed currently. They're requesting approval of the special use, which means that the BZA has the authority to approve it as long as the project meets 4 criteria listed in LaPel's video. Please note that while granting variances is a matter committed to discretion of the BZA, granting a special use approval is mandatory once the applicant shows compliance with relevant statutory criteria. The 4 criteria are that the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. The requirements and development standards for the requested special use as prescribed by the ordinance will be met. Granting the special use will not subvert the general purposes served by this ordinance and will not permanently injure other property or uses in the same district and vicinity. And the proposed use will be consistent with the character of the zoning district in which it is located and the town of LaPel comprehensive plan. I gave the BZA board kind of their own worksheet just so that you can write your own findings of fact. My staff report presents my findings of fact and analysis for it. The applicant proposed theirs. We will have public hearings, so you will have an opportunity to hear any other information that you could also, consider while making the findings of fact yourself. I would like to present the analysis for these criteria. So the first one is the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community.
Is there any way to turn up the volume a little bit?
Turn up.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's in here or what.
Because whenever you turn towards the computer, we can't hear.
Okay. So
There comes Amanda, take care of that.
I'll try to, because it sounds like it's better heard when I speak for some reason. Okay. Yeah. I'll be reading the staff report anyway. Okay. So the first criteria, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Junkyard use does have the potential to be injurious to the public health, but the way how the operations are conducted can minimize the risks. Based on LaPel's video definition of a junkyard, which is a place usually outdoors where waste or discarded property other than organic matter, including but not limited to automobiles and farm implements and trucks, is accumulated and is or may be salvaged for reuse or resale. This shall not include any industrial scrap metal yard. So, based on LaPel's video's definition of a junkyard, it assumes that some of the junkyard activities like dismantling and storage of the junk automobiles may happen outdoors. However, the applicant is proposing to conduct all dismantling operations inside of the building. All car fluids and car parts, except for the vehicle carcasses, would be stored inside of the building before they are transported elsewhere. Only vehicle carcasses would be stored in the fenced-in yard, with the stored carcasses not exceeding 4 feet in height. And that 4 feet in height is something that the applicant proposes, and something that the staff also introduced as a condition to the approval of the special use. Conducting dismantling activities indoors may mean the following. The noises associated with this activity will be greatly reduced because they are contained inside of the building. The air emissions would be, again, if you're dismantling a vehicle indoors, all of the air emissions are happening indoors. Since all fluids and combustible vehicle parts are meant to be stored indoors, any potential fires would be contained indoors as well. Of course, hopefully the operations are done in a way that, you don't have to have the fire department, but, if there is a need for that, again, because the vehicle is contained inside of the building, you have some fire rating of the building itself, it should be contained inside. And, a lot easier to access, to distinguish the fire, should there be any for that. And finally, because the only item stored outside is the car carcass that shouldn't have any combustible parts, we shouldn't expect a risk of fires outdoors. But again, even if it happened, the way how LKQ shows in examples of other sites where it has a similar facility in Colorado and Arizona, they obviously have areas to drive around the vehicles, so the fire truck should be able to come inside of the yard, drive around, get to the site. This type of operation with most polluting activities happening indoors greatly reduces the risk to the public health and makes the operation a lot cleaner than some other uses typically allowed in the general industrial zoning district. There are also many environmental regulations that the auto salvage yards have to abide by, and these regulations are enforced by the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And examples of those areas that item regulates are air, water, and soil pollution, stormwater runoff, hazardous waste disposal, and so on. So typically, if the use was permitted like this, the applicant would have to apply for permits both locally and to the state, various agencies. That's where, for example, if item meets certain permits to see that they would abide by those environmental regulations, this is the time when they would request certain environmental information. The applicant is proposing to preserve the flood zone area on the west side of the property. This area is also marked to be included into a future parking hotel. So preserving it means that it could potentially become an addition to the general welfare of the community by being turned into a park. Also, this part of the site, the flood zone area, I'll just show it really quick. So this aerial map shows in purple where the flood zone is, and I wanted to show the aerial because this one shows, what uses we have actually around. And we have only one house to the southwest, on the southwest corner of the subject site. And because we have this flood zone area where no development is going to occur, we have about 300 to 400 feet of a buffer between the residential existing use and the stone yard. Criteria number 2, the requirements and development standards for the requested special use as prescribed by this ordinance will be met. La Pelle's UDO has regulations specific to the junkyard special use. It basically says that if there is a junkyard or an auto repair facility, that the vehicles should be stored consistent with the following requirements. All such vehicles, including antique vehicles, shall be stored within the rear or side yard. In no case shall such vehicles be stored in any right-of-way, front yard, or required setback area. All storage areas for such vehicles should be completely enclosed with a 6-foot-tall, 100% opaque wood, stone, or masonry fence. Gates allowing access to the storage areas are permitted. The gate shall be closed when not in use and shall consist of a 6-foot-tall, 100% opaque wooden doors. So right now, we do have a site plan that shows that talking about the first criteria. Let's go back to the site plan. Right now we have the yard that will be fenced in, and right now it's outside of the front yard, outside of the setback areas. That's how it's displayed. Also, when the permitting actually happens, that's when they give us exact details on, actual front yard after all of the, what is it, the right of way dedications happen, things like that. So certain details of the site plan may change, but as it stands now, they are showing the yard, where it's supposed to be. And they do show in their application the kind of the character for the fence, which will be 100% opaque. They're proposing at least an 8 foot tall fence, which means the minimum 6 foot tall height requirement. So with this requirement, I can see that they met the development standards and requested special use. Granting the special use will not subvert the general purposes served by this ordinance and will not permanently injure other property or uses in the same district and vicinity. I took the general purpose because the criteria talks about not subverting the general purposes, and the UDO kind of states the general purpose in the beginning in volume 1, and it is to secure adequate light, air, and convenience of access, and safety from fire, flood, and other dangers, and to promote the public health, safety, comfort, convenience, morals, and general welfare. This general purpose kind of matches the first criteria, and I already provided analysis for that, so I don't want to go kind of into that. And so the only thing that I wanted to add here is the description of the general industrial district, because it says, the criteria says will not permanently injure other property or uses in the same district and vicinity. And so in order for us to understand whether such injury can occur, it's good to understand what the character of the district is. So the general industrial district is intended to provide locations for general industrial manufacturing, production, assembly, warehousing, research and development facilities, and similar land uses. This district is intended to accommodate a variety of industrial uses in locations and under conditions that minimize land use conflicts. This district should be used to support industrial retention and expansion in locality. Obviously, because it's a new kind of business, it feeds into the last sentence. But I wanted to also talk about the minimizing land use conflict. This is going back to the surrounding uses. So we have, vacant and agricultural land mostly around. We'll also have either existing or planned general industrial uses around. And so with that, I don't see a lot of conflict between the storage yard and the existing uses around. Finally, criteria 4. The proposed use will be consistent with the character of the zoning district in which it is located and the town of LaPel comprehensive plan. So the other uses in the general industrial district that are permitted as a special use are boat RV storage, indoor or outdoor, truck sales and service center, storage sale of petroleum products, sand gravel operations, and mineral extraction. These were listed as special uses, but this is just to kind of give an idea of other special uses that create a character for this general industrial zoning district. So some of these uses, like if you have mineral extraction, obviously you'll have some more dust just because the operations typically happen indoors. And so some of these they are found to have a little bit more pollution than what LPQ proposes. We have truck sales, service center, storage, sale of petroleum products. Again, a lot of these uses, the proposed junkyard is similar in character to those uses. When it comes to the comprehensive plan, this is one area where I would say I just provide my own analysis here. So this area and around it, the area itself was recommended for the light industrial zoning district. The areas to the north and south are also recommended for the light industrial, and to the west, and to the east, to the west it's agricultural. But what I saw as staff is that the doesn't actually have any areas shown for the general industrial. And so far, in my thinking, was if there is not a single area recommended by the comprehensive plan to be used as a general industrial, but there is interest of businesses to apply to build businesses that would be allowed in the general industrial zoning district, where would it be? And so, when you look at the comprehensive plan, obviously the closest would be the light industrial as kind of as a proxy to it. So that's kind of how my analysis typically goes about this proposal matching the comprehensive plan's vision. And in general, when the survey was conducted, again, it's according to the record of the comprehensive plan, when people were asked questions about where they would want to see industrial or commercial uses, it was south of State Road 38. So this is kind of why we see this gray area there. Finally, the way how LKQ is proposing to conduct its activities, you have most operations happening indoors. So if you had a light industrial business that also has most operations indoors, the character of those buildings would match what LKQ is proposing. So in that regard, to me, it also matches even some of the light industrial district look. So in the staff report, I kind of provide the summary for all of these facts, and I recommend approval based on my findings of fact. I also recommend certain conditions. I recommend 4 conditions for their approval, which is 2 of them are what the applicant provides anyway, which is that the applicant shall provide an 8-foot tall opaque fence around the entire storage yard. Then the applicant shall store all items in the outside yard at or below the height of 4 feet. The point of the condition here is just to keep the storage at 4 feet or less. The applicant shall sign the acknowledgement of special use document, which basically is the document that they will sign, and it's recorded against the property to make sure that everyone else knows that that special use was approved and with certain conditions. And then finally, in LaPel, special use approval typically is given to the current applicant, and if the tenant changes, they have to apply it again. So for example, let's say LKQ's special use was approved today, they decide to sell it to someone else, and it's another junkyard facility, they would have to apply for the special use approval separately because they would be, showing us a different kind of operation. That condition just exists in the UDO, but I kind of call it out as a condition just so that everyone knows that when it's on the recorded form, any future tenant knows that they have to reapply to the BZA for the special use approval. That's all that I have for you.
Next, we have, next we will have, presentation from LKQ.
Yes, sir. The petitioner can be invited to present evidence that would support their petition for a special use.
What would you guys like? Is it okay if I don't use the mic? Can everybody hear me?
No.
No? All right, I'll use it.
There you go. Oh, you got one?
How about now? There we go. I don't know. I can try to do both. okay. Yeah, not a problem. So, as you guys probably know, I'm sure most of you have seen this presentation before. If you haven't, happy to run through it again. So, I'm Chris Farrar, I'm the developer for LKQ. As you know, or maybe you don't know, LKQ had an initiative. Sorry, yeah, no, I talk with my hands, that's why I was offering. I know my tendency, so I'll try to do this and just point to me, and I'll eventually get it right. LKQ had an initiative to go out and essentially build these new prototype facilities all across the U.S. So we have done these in locations such as outside of Denver, Colorado, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Arizona. One of the next markets I identified was Indianapolis. So LKQ, when they were started, call it 20 plus years ago, went out and acquired, what they call your, quote unquote, mom and pop salvage yards that you see all around that aren't, that are eyesores, right? We all know it. Since over the last, like I said, 20 years, they have outgrown these facilities. They have, multiple facilities located around certain markets. I want to say here in Indianapolis, they have probably, I think 7 total in the state, maybe 8. This particular location, there would be probably 4 or 5 that would ultimately close down and consolidate into this location. And so, anyways, just giving you a little bit of background on how we got to where we are and how we identified this market. So, Indianapolis was presented to us. We obviously looked around different markets, found this location outside of State Road 13, and it kind of fit the bill. So I've got a little presentation here that can give you a little bit of idea of LKQ. They obviously have a website you can go to as well. So this is just high level. And like I said, happy to provide a copy of this to anybody. I think it's in the staff report, probably online as well. But I'll run through this probably pretty quickly, just because I know there's probably a lot of folks that want to ask me questions. But if you want me to slow down or have any questions, just holler at me. Happy to answer them. So, like I said, this is more about LKQ globally. Kind of talked about when they were founded in 1998. They went public. I talked a little bit how they have grown organically by acquiring mom and pops, and now to the point where they have outgrown those facilities and they're building these new prototype facilities. Next slide. This is literally their mission statement off of their website. LKQ stands for like, kind, quality. It's a basic question we get, but I figured I'd lay it out for you. This talks a little bit about their evolution process, when they were started and kind of how we got to where we are today. This gives you an idea of their operating units. They're in the automobile recycling business, so as you can imagine, there's multiple facets of that business. There's part distribution, there's recycling, there's everything down to a pick apart, right? Which you would see what you would Google and you would see the pictures that nobody likes. But these guys, they do recycle everything, right? They know the spotlight's on them, but they also know that given where we are in today's world, they understand that recycling is a big component of it, and so they found ways to take one person's trash and turn it into obviously a revenue stream, but also reducing the carbon footprint along the way. So this kind of gives you an idea of the different markets they had both in Europe and the U.S. That's just a footprint. Keep going. So this is a picture of the dismantling process that you heard described earlier. 800,000 vehicles per year. That number's probably changed. It's probably closer to 1 million now. But this is a good representation of the facility and what you're going to see. I can kind of go into it, but the vehicle is essentially brought up on a lift. Once it's up on this lift, everything is logged in a handheld computer. They then proceed to take the tires off. They drain everything, all the fluids, remove the motor, remove the battery, and then ultimately dismantle the frame or the body of the car and put it onto pallets, which is then stored in the warehouse and ultimately shipped out. What's left of the vehicle is essentially a frame, it may be a quarter panel, maybe a roof panel, windshield, and that carcass, which is a good term for it, essentially there's nothing operable on it, no combustibles, no fluids. That's what's stored ultimately in the yard. This talks a little bit about their ESG program, so I'd welcome you to go to their website. All the information you need on what they're doing is there. The next slide. Same thing here as far as their focus areas. This is, I think, this is 21. This kind of gives you an idea of what they're accomplishing through these newer facilities. You know, number of vehicles procured, all the way down to the number of, the gallons of antifreeze, waste oil, tires, catalytic converters. So I think I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. So, LKQ, when they get a vehicle and it comes in, they'll capture whether it's brake fluid, whether it's antifreeze, gasoline, washer, windshield wiper fluid. They turn around and repurpose that, whether it's for their own fleet vehicles or for sale on the shelf down the road. All that is recaptured. There's not a drop of that goes to waste. So they have figured out a way to monetize these cars that are, in the insurance carrier's eyes, total, but in reality, 75 or 80% of that car is still in great shape. Next slide. The EPA monitoring at LKQ facilities. So, this is, the EPA on a federal level, obviously LKQ has a very close relationship with those guys. As you can imagine, they're breathing down their neck all the time. So, compliance for LKQ being publicly traded, they know it's a big deal. They don't take it lightly. They're heavily involved. And then depending on which state, in this case, IDEM, they also have a great working relationship with those guys as well. So, IDEM has a specific salvage yard workbook that all quote-unquote salvage yards have to work by. LKQ obviously falls in that category of these dismantling facilities. That can be argued, but either way, they still comply. They're having annual audits done by third parties. IDEM comes out, they get a complaint, they'll come out, inspect the yard. And they'll pass in flying colors. So LKQ takes it seriously. They do try to work closely. They do annual training on site. They test their stormwater runoff. They test all the water at the facilities. They know they're under a magnifying glass, and I think they do a good job of making sure that there's no trip ups along the way. These are just some of the recycling achievements that I mentioned earlier, so these are on the website. Corporate citizenship, so I can speak to this just from some of the facilities that we have recently developed for them. They do try to be good community stewards. They try to be involved as much as the community will have them, whether that's working with the local fire department, working with the local police station, police stations fine. Also, any type of charitable contributions. Like these guys they're not just going to be out there on an island. Right? They want to be involved. They're going to have jobs that are created. They're going to have folks that are going to live in the community. I've gone back to a facility we recently did outside of Phoenix in Casa Grande and sat down, talked to the mayor, and he had nothing but positive things to say. So they had hesitancies at first as well, but once they got in there and got up and operating, they said the relationship couldn't be better. This kind of circles back to those facilities that I mentioned, some of those employees. So first year, I would think, or I know that they'll probably be close to, I would say, 40 to 50 jobs initially, and then by the end of year one, or probably 18 months of operations, there'll be up to 70 plus jobs created. Some of those jobs will be some transplants maybe from these existing facilities that will get closed down. Most likely Avon being some of those jobs, but there will be new job creation. There will be folks looking to move out here, bring their families, buy homes, etc. This gives a little summary here on, this is just a comparison, I guess I would say, for our facility compared to your typical industrial facility warehouse. You know, people always ask, why are you buying 100 acres and only putting a 150,000 square foot building on it? It's a great question, but for LKQ's use, obviously it makes sense to have the storage yard, but you know, I think a benefit of that, because typically, you know, if you're having 100 acres, you're probably seeing a building that's, you know, 1 million plus square feet. And, you know, with that comes tractor trailers, several more trips per day. So this just gives you kind of an idea of what LKQ is going to be doing. So typically they have, you know, 5 tractor trailers a day, maybe 2 in the morning, 3 in the evening. Obviously they're going to have employees, but then they also have your, you know, what I would call your delivery box trucks. And those are the guys that are running the parts to the local body shops and AutoZone, O'Reilly kind of places. This is for the on-site operations. Some of this Oksana covered as well, but you know, it's worth noting that there's no public access. So, you know, I know you can get online and look at the different types of businesses that LKQ has. That you have, you know, what people think of salvage yard or junkyard, you think someone going behind the fence, taking their own tools, picking out a part. That's not what this facility is. This facility is completely off, no public access. It's only employees. No one's allowed behind the fence to pull all parts. Not to mention the frames of the vehicles that are in the yard. There's really probably not much on there that's left. It's really working, we think. Nothing stored above 4 feet. I think that's been harped on pretty good. 8-foot solid fence, landscape buffer, no smell, no excessive smells or noises. This is a new facility that we just did and finished late last year in Denver, outside of Denver. This is the one I mentioned earlier that we did outside of Salt Lake. This is one in Casa Grande, so just outside of Phoenix. I think I put this in here mainly to give you an idea of, you know, the detail that LKQ goes into when they're placing these frames in the yard. You know, go to another salvage yard. You're not going to find anything that looks like this. It's just going to be kind of wherever they can find a spot. Obviously, LKQ takes pride in what they do. They're going to stack this up. It looks like a parking lot. Over time, this yard will fill up, and then they will come in and, you know, once it starts to get full, they start to remove those frames, and those frames are removed for scrap metal and put on a truck, and then that's the life process. So I don't think I mentioned it, but, you know, these cars that are going to come in here, they typically come in, they'll be on the ground for 24 hours, go inside, dismantled, taken out, and then the life of that car is typically, call it 400 to 500 days, and then ultimately it will be compacted and removed for scrap. This gives you an idea of the fence, the solid metal pedal fence that we put around it, and then this was some landscaping that was the young landscaping, obviously over time, those trees get bigger, so. Warehousing, this is the inside of the warehouse. So I showed you a picture of the dismantling bay where the cars are taken apart, and then the parts from here are put on a conveyor belt and then ultimately go into the warehouse and stack like this. This is just high level distribution facility for this market. And here's the site plan. I don't think there's anything else in that. Okay, this is just, no, you're fine. This is some additional pictures of the Denver facility. So we had final photos taken recently once winter broke, and this gives you, better idea of kind of what the building looked like. If you go to the next slide, this is a picture of the office, same type of warehouse. This gives you an idea of the yard as it starts to fill up, right? So they'll start there and then gradually fill up the yard. And that's it. Does anybody have any? I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions.
Will this facility be a distribution center for paint and body supplies as well?
we're gonna start with questions from the board, and then we'll get into.
So at this time, from the board,
I got something to say here before you go on. You're talking about dumping them cars out for 24 hours. They're gonna sit there and drip stuff all over the ground for 24 hours before you do anything about it? You just said it.
sir, we'll come back to your comments in a minute, and after we get our questions from the zoning board.
Well, you asked me a question, that was in there.
I know we did, but you run it through the board first. Thank you. Any questions from the board for either Mr. Farrar or for Jeff Gray?
Your presentation here tonight, there are several things listed in there on things that help, KQ. Thank you. Your presentation here tonight had several different conditions and things like that, and standard operations that help KQ is typically involved in. Would you have any objection to this presentation being attached to a potential approval of the special use as a overall condition or commitment of LKQ?
Absolutely not. What you guys see here is literally what we do in other markets, and it's exactly what we'll tell you. So, conditional uses that you want to see, I mean, tilt wall construction building, metal fence, landscape buffer, nothing sort of buffer. We're willing to adhere to all that.
In your presentation, you talked about EPA testing, but you also talked about independent audits. How often are those conducted, and what does that consist of?
So the independent audits there's a large annual audit that's done every year. The group is called Apex Companies, and so they service all the LKQ facilities across the country. And they come in and perform everything from your stormwater pollution prevention plan, all the way down to your above storage tanks, your compliance with the EPA. All that's done on an annual basis. Now, if there is items found that warrant additional audits, they will comply with those. Also worth noting that in this particular market, there's been complaints to IDEM before. IDEM comes out immediately, investigates the complaint, and then essentially provides a resolution if needed.
It also said that there was 1 million cars per year. I'm assuming that's nationwide.
Yes.
And if so, how many locally would you be expecting?
That is yes, that would be nationwide. Locally, I don't want to, let me get back to you on that one. Usually I have Randy here, he can answer that. I can find that out for you though. I would say it's probably, I'd be lying to you. Let me just confirm that, sorry.
Okay. One last one for me then. You talked about the process of bringing in cars and things. I'd just like a little more detail from the time they roll into the facility. Where do they sit? Where do they get placed? Where do they go? You said, I think 24 hours, but I'd just like a little more detail on that process of getting the cars to the facility and then indoors.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to go back here and operate this thing without messing it up. So this, if you see here, this is kind of where they're going to stage the cars, right? So this is where they're going to come in off the trailer and take them on. So once they come in here, within 24 hours, that vehicle, it comes into this dismantling facility, and then the frame ultimately goes out. So the question is, I think the gentleman over here was going to ask it, and it's a great question, is what happens in that 24 hours? Is there fluids leaking everywhere? There's not fluids leaking everywhere. They're obviously not going to take a vehicle that's put on a trailer that has fluids that are just spewing out. Not to mention that vehicle that's been on that trailer is coming from an auction that is, I don't know how many miles away. So can I don't, how do I answer the question on, will there be fluids coming out of it? In my experience, no. I've been out to these facilities, I've seen the cars that are sitting there, they're not just sitting there, gasoline's just not pouring out into the ground. I mean, these guys have common sense, they're not just gonna unload a vehicle that has a leak. But if you wanna make the claim, you can make the claim. But anyways, back to your question, what happens on the life of that car? So that car comes in, sits here 24 hours, like I said, goes into the facility, and then is put on the handheld computer. Ultimately, all the parts are taken off, and then, you know, like I said, depending on how many dismantling folks they have working, those guys can get through, call it 4 to 5 cars a day, times however many dismantling bays, and that's what goes out. So sometimes there's not any backlog here. Sometimes there could be 5 cars here. It just depends on when they're getting them from the auction and how they're coming in.
How often do you crush, how long would the cars sit out in the lot, just the carcass?
So the carcass typically has, call it 400 to 500 day lifeline that I gave you. So I would say a year and a half max. It's really controlled on, you know, these guys, they obviously track the commodity pricing for steel. And so that'll determine it. But ultimately, when this yard fills up, they have no choice but to take these out. And so that's where they do the crushing. And they do the crushing within the site. And, you know, they've had sound studies done. It's no louder than an 18-wheeler driving the road or a riding lawnmower. So we have those studies, happy to provide those to you.
Yeah, you haven't, talked about how big the building is, how many facilities can you, like how many times, how many cars can you go in and work on? Like is it 3 cars bay or a 10-car bay or a facility like that?
Yeah. I think for this facility, I have to go back and look, I want to say it's between 9 and 12 dismantling bays. So if you have it all depends on the dismantler that's doing it and how quickly they can work. So if you have 9 dismantling bays and you have 5 cars a day, you know, 45 a day, that can change. Obviously, depending on the car, some cars are easier to dismantle than the others.
How many are you anticipating on doing, receiving each day?
That'll be a question that I can get you that answer. If I told you an answer, I wouldn't be accurate. I can ask the local operator, and I can get you that answer, so happy to provide that. Like I said, I know some days they get none, and then some days they may get more. So I can give you probably a number on average. I don't think that there's a set in stone number.
Yeah, just wondering how far away do you, collect the cars? I mean, is this in Indianapolis area, Fort Wayne area, or what?
From my understanding, yes, it'll be in the state of Indiana, but I'll find out either way. I'm happy to, I'm gonna write it down, ask the little guys. That's the only question I can't answer.
Ron or Kim?
You might answer this question a while ago. You said, I've seen where there's supposed to be 60 jobs open up here when this comes in. And then when you're gonna close down other facilities, and I'm sure that some of those people are gonna move in to work in here. I just wondered how many jobs you're really talking about could be here in the Bel Air.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I don't know. As far as how many of those existing jobs are gonna come here, those folks, some of those folks are gonna have the opportunity to come. Some of those folks may not wanna come. In past experiences, in the Phoenix market and these others, they usually get higher paying jobs. If there's, you know, call 6 positions like that, 3 to 4 will come. Some of the dismantlers may not come. So, but as far as the number of jobs created, I can say there will be 70 plus jobs after a year and a half of operations. Now, are those all new jobs from this local area? I can't tell you that, but.
I have one other question, I don't know if you can answer this or not.
Okay.
And how much money has LQK spent, or LQK spent, since they've been in business for cleanup of bills, or do you know?
I don't know that.
7 million in violations and cleanup efforts.
Yep. Yep, that's correct.
How do I know and you don't?
Probably because you Googled it.
Who do you work for again?
Are we really gonna do this? But I can. I didn't think so.
You know,
Yeah. So to answer your question, sir, before I was rudely interrupted,
Oh,
I don't know how much that they've spent on cleanups. But what I can tell you is that the facilities that we are building are because of the older ones, which is back to my original slide from the, and by the way, this has been said since I've been here. We are closing down these facilities to build these new state-of-the-art facilities. Okay, yes, if you go into an old salvage yard, are you gonna see things you don't wanna see? Are you gonna get on the internet and Google and find numbers? Of course you are. You can do that on any business. Go look up Amazon, go pick it. It doesn't matter.
Amazon.
I'm just telling you what we're gonna do on these new facilities.
He took after me.
So, I'm just trying to answer the question for you. I can't answer and tell you how much they spilt on cleanups or spills. I don't know. What I do know is that for the last 4 complaints that have come in from IDEM for their Avon facility, IDEM has come back and said there's absolutely no findings at all. And these are just people that are complaining to go complain, and that they've had they've come in, done the inspection, and they said, absolutely, you guys are doing a great job. And that's a facility that's 20 plus years old. So, like I said, I get it. I understand there's questions, I understand there's concerns, but I also think you gotta give us a fighting chance, and let me tell you what we are developing and what we're not. What you Google on the internet is not what's gonna be built here.
I think you pointed at it, but I didn't see there's a glare. The crushing happens outside. That's my first question. Is that crushing? is
Correct.
Outdoors.
And it typically only happens once a quarter, maybe twice a quarter if weather pops up, but yes, typically for this area, I'm gonna call this a quadrant right here, it would occur in the middle of that quadrant.
Second question. It's a Monday through Friday facility. Are cars coming in? You said there's days there might be 0, but is it Monday to Friday deliveries on cars? You might not be able to answer that, but I think it goes back to his question and Jeff's question of the 24 hours. What happens if it's on a holiday weekend?
Yeah, no, these guys are
Drops on a
running.
Thursday and sits there for 4 or 5 days.
Correct, and look, that's a great question, but I can tell you that, these cars, the goal for these guys is to get these cars in and out as quickly as possible. So, is there a car that goes in, where is the local oil change place? Is there a car that sits at the local mechanical shop for more than a day or a week before it gets worked on? I don't know. You guys tell me, this is your town, so. Like I said, LKQ is gonna make an effort to get every vehicle that comes in there. I mean, to them, it's money. Why would they want a vehicle to just sit there? Their goal is to move them through as quickly as possible.
I get that.
Yep.
Part B of that question then, has any of the other facilities or localities enforced more of a containment unit or facility at that part of the facility where the newer cars are coming in? If there is any type of drainage or leakage, to contain that, even more so than the rest of the facility?
So, when the car comes in, I can go back to this demand. Let me try to get all the way back to it, so. Get back to the dismantling photo. So, within this dismantling photo, these are these tanks, right, where they're gonna capture the fluids of the car. So, there's also, they'll have spill kits. I think this is before we have it here. Anyways, they have spill kits there in the event that occurs, right? Now, is there special containment? To answer your question, no. I mean, it's.
Well, and then on the outside, where they're being staged, is there a wall?
No, no. There's typically, those things are coming right in and coming out, so.
I guess what I want to say is, what is the noise level with inside the plant? Because there's several family homes not far away. And I was concerned about the noise level inside and the noise level when crushing cars.
Yeah, no, great question, and I think, like I said, the crushing cars, we've had sound studies done. It's no louder. First of all, it's gonna be contained within a fence. Keep in mind, this is 100 acres, correct? So, where they're gonna do it is gonna be centralized in the yard. They obviously are cognizant of the neighbors, but sound studies have proven that it's no louder than an 18-wheeler driving up and down the road, or in this instance, far as sound goes within the facility, these guys are using impact wrenches, and then there is what I would call a forklift that will be driving, but that's all contained within the warehouse. So I don't anticipate, you drive up to the other facilities that we've done in both Denver, you don't hear anything. So,
Mr. Graham, I have more of a question directly towards you. So one of the things you mentioned was including this presentation in the special use. So I know LaBelle's been kind of fooled before on some variances and things like that. So if that presentation was included, what would happen if they would vary from that? So instead they turn it into one of the pick aparts or something, because now they have a variance where they can run a salvage yard. So what would happen on that?
If the special use were granted without any conditions whatsoever, at that point, you are hemmed in by just the four corners of the document. If they continue to conduct a salvage yard, there's no enforcement capability of the town. However, once you put conditions on, which that could be attached as a whole condition, any substantial variance from what's found in there, any part of it, would allow the LaBelle Planning Department or the LaBelle Council now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, to be able to go out there with an enforcement, hey, you're violating the zoning ordinance because we only made this special use contingent upon you doing all that. So that document would be recorded along with the property to allow future LaBelle planners to say, they gotta do this, 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 and that, all that stuff. You can't do that.
So then we don't do nothing about it.
Well, and I would offer up too, like I said, IDEM has an existing salvage workbook that is required that LKQ already adheres to. So, it's easy for me to say this because I know they're gonna do it, but if you wanted to add that as a supplement, as an additional condition, you have to conform to all the items. We have no problem doing that.
A question I had for, for Chris, and they said storage of these carcasses, nothing will be over 4 feet high. And I know if you look at vehicles, unless there's some kind of crushing being done, or they're having the tops cut off of them, how are you gonna maintain those under that 4-foot height level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, keep in mind that the vehicles, they're not gonna be sitting, they're not sitting on tires, right? They don't have to put the wheels on, so it's really just a caliper that's sitting on top of a rim that's, just so. When I go out to the yard, these things are, is it 4 feet 1 inch? Maybe, a whole lot of tape, but typically, the point is we're not gonna double stack anything. We have an 8-foot fence, line of sight from the street, you'll never see behind it. But on average, everything is 4 feet, so, there's nothing that's gonna be double stacked on top of it. I don't have a problem with that condition at all. So, and it comes back, and it has to be 4 feet on the nose, and it's 4 feet on the nose, that's fine, it is what it is. We can stand, all I can tell you is we can easily stand behind that, I'm not worried about that.
Thank you. And then one question for Roxana. In the fact sheet that was written up, it stated that there was only one residence that is ordered with this property. When I look at the plot map on the map, and there's also one, and I don't know if they consider it's not abutting because it is across State Road 13, but that property is right there across the street from this facility.
Let me. Let me look at do you hear? So this is a map, is it on the east side?
Okay, so this map shows the actual uses according to the property cards. And so here we have use vacant land. Is this where?
Yeah, that is one, the small square in that larger block is a residence.
like, whatever I was pulling up the records, it said vacant land there, maybe. So you say this is a house that is there, okay?
On the west end, we have the one house residence that is on the corner, the southwest corner, that little square there.
Yeah, that's the one that I bring up in the
Right.
second one.
And also the property to the northwest, that says use agricultural, comes down to your left. I believe that property also has a residence on it.
So all of these uses again is when you click on the property card, it's what people report
Right.
the use is of the property. So I just go by the official record there.
Right, just wanted clarification that there are actual other residences that
Mhm.
may border this property. So,
Okay. I wanted to add that so a few remonstrance letters have already been submitted, and so I just put them all together as an Exhibit A. And it was printed, and each board member was given a copy of it today. This is just so that people know. Because some of the remonstrance letters talk about, environmental issues, I did a quick search of Indiana Department of Environmental Management violations, just LKQ as the name. LKQ sometimes has, name as LKQ Midwest. This pulls up any records of any violations from 1995 up until September 14th for all counties in Indiana, all media of interest, and it says your search returned no results. So at least, using the name LKQ, I haven't found any publicly available environmental violations in Indiana. I know that the public has given examples of other violations from other states, but obviously because we're talking about our context, I wanted to see if we have any violations. We talked to IDEM about this company. They haven't found anything. They always have their salvage license registrations. They always have other permitting things kind of done well in Indiana. So I just wanted to add that, and I added it as an Exhibit B today. This is just something new that I wanted to show today before we go into the public hearing. Okay.
Any other questions from?
If the questions are done from the board, my recommendation would be to open the public hearing, let people speak for or against the project. The board can ask questions of the people providing that information, and then at the end of that, the petitioner should be invited to address the concerns that were brought up in that public comment that the board would like to hear addressed.
All right, so at this time, we will open the public hearing for the this petition. Questions from the public, we'll start with those who have filled out the cards to speak. So our first speaker is Jeff Purdue.
Hello, I'm Jeff Purdue. I'm here with my wife Vicki, and we actually own the property right to the north side of the proposal up there. We have for 30 years. We farm. I kind of take issue to the lady calling that vacant land. I make a living off that vacant land. A lot of people make a living off that vacant land. there's some issues out here. First of all, I never thought I would ever own property across from the junkyard. Really sticks in my craw thinking my property values are going to be extremely negative here. I've lived in the Pendleton, lapel area all my life. My wife and I both have. We see growth coming. We see Pendleton handling growth a certain way. I would love to see lapel handle growth in a certain way. This is not it. One of the first things I want to point out is when Bill Hobbs went out there and put the wells in, he formed a wellhead protection committee. I was on that committee. I know that aquifer goes right underneath this property. There is a test well practically on this property. The farm that I have that butts up to it, I have had to drain that farm with a lot of field tile to be able to farm it because of active springs from that aquifer on my property. You go out there right now, no matter how dry it is, and my tiles are running water, which is collecting water out of that aquifer. The idea that you guys are even considering putting this type of business with the potential hazards that are available here on top of your water supply is really unconscionable to me. You screw that water supply up and you screw it forever. So that is one of the main things. I cannot seem to get my head around the whole idea of this location. The next thing is, it's set right on State Road 13 in between the interstate and town. It is one of the first things people are going to see as they come down towards town. I would almost guarantee you boardrooms all across the country have got this location pegged for future Myers stores, future Walmart stores, future this, future that. If the town needs money that bad, we should be thinking long term, because this stuff's coming, but it's not going to come with a junkyard there. It's going to be a negative. So, my main thing is, you just can't put a whole lot of lipstick on this pig, and it's still pig. So, think of it that way. To me, it's a super negative, and I wouldn't have any part of it. Thank you.
Jeff. I didn't say that there was any kind of time limits on as far as how long you're going to speak. We'll put it at 7. Using Jeff as an example, we were at about 5 minutes, so we will try to limit it to 5 minutes, and best we can, we'll allow you to go over what need be, but try to 5 minutes. Next to speak is Mr. Dave Smothers.
Passing down to the other members, please. My name's David Smothers, and don't suppose we're talking. Hello. I'm David Smothers. I live at 9148 West State Road 38. I'm 1,000 feet north of where this proposed property is. So that means I'm a little farther away from Shelby, which was put in, than I am now. I hear every morning, starting at 6:30 on. Starting at 6:30 in the morning, till God knows when, I hear them banging on them tumblers in the concrete trucks. At 10:30 at night on a Sunday, the high intensity lights point right at my windows. lights up. And I'm not the only one that has to deal with this. And the bad thing is, the planning commission or the town of LaPel has no authority over it. That's poor planning. And I don't want to see this end up in the same way. And the only other thing I'm going to say, because I've got someone I'd rather do some talking for us that are opposed to this. I've passed out basically a short resume with all my qualifications. I've been in the physical damage business all my life. And what I want to tell you is for 6 months when I was with American Family as a physical damage adjuster, I was assigned to manage our total loss center at IIA/IASP. That's where they buy their cars. It's the Indiana Auto Auction, Indiana Auto Salvage Pool. And we rented offices and garage space. And the reason for this was when insurance companies deemed the car as a total loss, it was picked up and moved so it wouldn't include storage, whatever shop it was in. Sometimes those cars sit out there 2 weeks before we had them pulled in for our inspections. And every day at the end of our shift, they brought them in and set them down with the payloader. They picked them up at the end of the day. We went through bags and bags of floor dry. So if they sit out there 24 hours and he's never seen a drop of fluids, he had his eyes closed. It happens. It's going to happen. Salvage yards, we've seen depictions of this, which is one extreme, to some of the stuff that we've seen online. That's not what this is about. It's about water. But I can guarantee you one thing, even though junk yards, salvage yards, recyclable yards are all the same thing, one thing hasn't changed. They all still use gas, antifreeze, coolant, transmission fluid, and when they get crashed, it comes out. And that's my concern. It's not, I got a lot of selfish reasons, but it's the water. And we need to consider that. I mean, if it's just a minute chance that that would happen, why do we take it?
Right.
I don't get it. So that's all I'm going to speak about, and hopefully we get to our representative before long.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Thanks for indulging.
Thank you.
Next, speaker or presenter will be Mr. Russell Cate, the attorney for the demonstration.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good morning. Good luck.
Test.
I turned you
Test.
on. There you go.
Please just pass these down. It's duplicative of the information that you already have that was supplied to you. However, these have some color photographs that may aid you in making your determination. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, my name is Russell Cate. I represent a group of demonstrators. That information has been set forth in the letter that's attached to the materials that I've provided to you. I'm trying to keep my comments short. I know we're short on time, but there's some very important things I need this board to consider on behalf of the demonstrators who are speaking out against this project. Before I get into the substance of the presentation, I do need to address a couple preliminary matters. And before I raise these preliminary matters, I need to make sure everybody is clear about a couple things. Number one, these statements are not meant to offend, embarrass, harass, or call into question anybody's integrity. But on today's date, I sent a letter to both Oksana and Mr. McMullen, who represents the BZA, and I raised the conflict of interest provision under Indiana Code 3674909, and respectfully, I must ask Mr. Paddock to recuse himself from a vote. I understand he may disagree with me, but I think pursuant to Indiana Code 3674909, which says that at a BZA meeting, if bias, prejudice, or somebody is unable to be impartial, they must be disqualified from hearing and discussion, or if they have a direct or indirect financial interest in the outcome of the hearing of the decision. The The content of the letter addressed that Dan Paddock obviously is Cam and Landon Paddock's father. Dan Paddock sits on the Plan Commission, who is responsible for tendering a certification of what they consider to be official action. I think Mr. Graham raised earlier that there is litigation that was filed to directly address this issue. Just recently, a declaratory judgment was filed on behalf of the remonstrators. But what's important here is that Landon Paddock is employed by Arco Design Build. This is in the materials that is submitted to the board. Arco Design Build is a firm who has done work for LKQ in Arkansas. Prior to working for Arco, Landon worked for IMI, which owns E&B Paving, which is where Mr. Paddock here who sits on the board is employed. It's expected that both Arco and E&B are going to tender bids to work on this project, and then thus it's the remonstrator's position that not only Mr. Paddock, Cam Paddock, I should clarify, has a direct or indirect financial interest. Someone's got to supply the gravel for 103 acres. But that he can't be unbiased or impartial, and for those reasons, we would request that Mr. Paddock recuse himself. I'll let Mr. Graham address that at the conclusion of my comments. Secondarily, I've also raised the issue, but I do need to preserve it here, that the board does not have authority to hear the special use variance because the actions of the Plan Commission and the Town Council rendered the ordinance rezoning this from agricultural to general industrial is void ab initio. Again, there was a lawsuit that was filed asking the court to make that determination, and if that's correct, this board has no authority to be ruling on that. Another important point that the board must concern itself with: the town of LaPel has an ordinance structure, and the ordinance structure sets forth what an application must contain. There was no mention in the staff report in this of the deficiency of the application. Number one, an application must contain a deed for the property involved. The public records that were submitted on the Town of LaPel's website did not include a deed for the property involved, only a title search for 2 of the parcels. There must also be a letter from the Madison County Board of Health indicating that the special use will make acceptable use of an existing or proposed septic system, or a letter from the public sewer provider stating that the proposed special use shall be served by this facility. That is the responsibility of the petitioners who filed this application, and that's not here. Therefore, the board should not rule on this application because the petitioners did not comply with ordinance 1.8.4 under special use process of the Town of LaPel's ordinances. If the board determines that it is intent on proceeding with this hearing, I want to reiterate a couple things. Number one, there's 4 criteria that you should be listening for, each of you on the board. There's 4 criteria. Ms. Polry went over those criteria, but I'm going to go over them again just briefly. The approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, general welfare of the community. Requirements in the development standards for the special use will not be met. Special use will not subvert general purposes served by the ordinance, and proposed use will be consistent with the character of the zoning district for which it is located in the Town of LaPel's comprehensive plan. Those are the 4 things that you have to consider if you are going to decide whether or not to grant this special use. Let's talk about each of them in turn. Number 1, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community. A couple things I want to point out, ladies and gentlemen, and no disrespect to Mr. Farrar. I understand he is here to do a job, but let's be clear. He's not here on behalf of LKQ. There's not a representative here today from LKQ. There's a lot of questions that did not get answered. How many jobs are coming? The number of days these cars are going to sit outside. The number of bays that are inside that can actually service these cars that are coming on a day-to-day basis. Those are the things that I heard. The response to that I heard was I can get those answers. Today's the day for those answers. There has to be evidence for the board to consider before it can render its ruling. That evidence is not before the board. There's also reference to the fact that there were studies available on the traffic studies that could be provided. Why weren't they submitted with the application? Why aren't they here today for the board's consideration? This is a $1 billion company. Let's be very clear about that. This is a $1 billion company. Most of the presentation that was provided by Mr. Farrar today, on behalf of whom I'm guessing is the developer, not LKQ, if this is a $1 billion company, where is the money that was spent for a local environmental study impact study? There's a lot of talk about a national study. There's a lot of talk about the corporate responsibility at a national level and everything that's done to get harmful things out of the environment. But what about a local study for the residents of LaPel to say, this is what's going to happen and this is what's not going to happen? What about an economic impact study? Something that actually says in real comprehensive terms, the real tangible assets that this company would bring. Because all we saw was a slideshow. There's nothing to back it up. And if this board votes on that, you're just going to be taking LKQ's word spoken through its developer. That's not doing a service to the people of LaPel. I must be critical of the staff report to some extent. The number one thing is that this approval of the special use will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. I heard during the staff presentation that there would be mitigation. Folks, mitigation is not elimination. Mitigation is not elimination. There is an acknowledgement that this is going to bring pollutants to LaPel, but there's no answers as to how those pollutants are going to be mitigated specifically. The only thing I saw in the staff report was that all of this would take place inside and that it would be mitigated through the air conditioning system. Well, an air conditioning system is not an air filtration system designed specifically for automotive breakdown. I'll point to the board to my materials that were included herein that talks specifically about IDEM's recognition of auto salvage yard contaminants of concern. Just to name a few: ethyl glycol, lead, cadmium, ethanol, asbestos, mercury, metals, PCBs, asbestos. These are all provided as Exhibit E, direct from IDEM specific to auto salvage yards.
Mr. Hicks, you already 8 minutes, you were a couple minutes over already, so I know you got a lot to present.
If I may, he does represent 4 different remonstrators, so I recommend giving a lot of leeway in this case.
All right.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I'll try to be respectful of the other people's time as well. I understand. I don't want to take away from anybody else. So I would point the board to the materials that were provided herein. I would encourage you to read them. I do want to speak for just a moment about this constant talk of IDEM and the reference to the workbook that IDEM provides. The workbook that is being referenced is in direct relation to the staff report's notation that there is an Indiana Clean Yard program for auto salvage yards. That's true, but it's a self-certification. The company certifies that they did it. IDEM sends a representative out to walk it for a day that they schedule, and they get the blessing of IDEM. That's what happens. The program materials are contained herein in the remonstrators' exhibits. I think a gentleman had spoken earlier. He had mentioned a little bit about the cost of cleanup. I think one of the board members, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was that raised the question. The cost of cleanup. The cost of cleanup is very different from a fine. And I think that one of the attendees here was referencing a fine that had been imposed. Yes, a quick Google search can actually tell you how much the EPA has fined this company, LKQ. It's not a random website. I looked it up myself. I went direct to the EPA's website and included the orders from the EPA itself with these materials. One of those orders fined Keystone Automotive Operations, which is owned by LKQ, $2.5 million for environmental violations, intentional environmental violations. Another one in Pennsylvania, again, this is the EPA. Fine them several $100,000 for discharging into the water source. California, another air violation. These are just a few. All of them are contained here. Final order from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, an actual copy of the order from the EPA. It's not just a Google search. This is a government document provided by the federal government. Also contained in the materials is reference to a letter dated July 31st, 2018 from IDEM. This is reference JV Salvage Yard Incorporated down in Bloomington. Some of you may have heard about this, where there was actually a known contamination as a result of the salvage yard operating. IDEM tested the soil, and it was testing above the EPA benchmark for PCBs, aluminum, copper, iron, lead, oil, and grease. There's also studies that are included with these materials that talk about the fact that even the carcasses that are being stored, they still have dirt, dust, grime, and with rainwater, if it's being stored for 500 days, all of that leads to the potential contamination of soil. We've heard a little bit of testimony, I think it was Mr. Perdue that talked just a little bit about it, about how shallow the wells are that are drilled here. That is a real concern for the residents here. I've also attached a map of the aquifer system. I would encourage each of the board members to look at that map. It's accessible online through the Indiana DNR, and it talks about these specific aquifers and their propensity to soak in things because of the soil that lies above them. They are more susceptible to that in certain chemicals. The requirements, and so I've tendered findings of fact. I should also mention, very important, this Clean Auto program, there's a financial incentive for these companies to comply with that. It's a claim for payment for mercury switches, so if an auto salvage yard is turning in mercury switches, the state of Indiana actually pays them for that. So there's a financial incentive for them to do this as well. A couple other concerns that I've heard from remonstrators. This is a 177,000 square foot warehouse. We all heard what happened in Richmond, Indiana in April, where a warehouse burned for 4 solid days. 2,000 residents had to be evacuated. There was a salvage yard. Again, these materials are contained herein. There was a salvage yard in Clarksville, Indiana, where that caught fire. The fire department couldn't put it out. Why? Because there were no fire hydrants nearby. I think we're going to find the same thing with this particular location here. There's not a ladder truck in LaPel that can service this facility. An interlocal agreement is still going to take a substantial amount of time for either Fishers or Hamilton County or Noblesville or Anderson to send units over for a 177,000 square foot warehouse that is going to have chemicals stored inside of it. As to element, I believe number 2, requirements and development standards of the requested special use provided will be met. The evidence that I heard, and I think it's acknowledged in the staff report, is that this fence that's going to be built all the way around this junkyard is going to be a metal fence. LaPel UDO doesn't allow metal fences for junkyards. 10.2.14.n requires junkyards to be surrounded by a 6-foot-tall, 100% opaque wood, stone, or masonry fence. Granting the special use will subvert, this is element number 3, the general purpose served by the ordinance and will permanently injure property or uses in the district or vicinity. a company of this size, if they are truly identifying this as a prime spot for their operations, it's for you. It's okay, cute. If they're truly identifying this as a prime spot for their location, why has an environmental study not been done and provided to the residents? This community has grave concerns about that. That's one of their biggest concerns, and it should be the board's concern as well. Affidavits have been tendered from realtors that indicate home sales will decline around this area. Property values will decrease if the special use is granted and a junkyard is constructed. Does the town of LaPel want to be synonymous in the headlines with the junkyard city? For people coming up I-69 into the beautiful downtown, up 13. The remonstrators believe that granting this special use is short-sighted. The presentation in the slideshow by the developer, not LKQ, shows a beautiful building. It's very clean. But I just bought a new car. And then I took my kids to soccer practice. And it's filthy inside. What's the point? Same thing's going to happen here. What happens when LKQ sells this entity to another corporation based in China? Who is going to be responsible when they shut this down for the cost of remediation? Noblesville has experience with a Superfund site in the Firestone facility. There's GM plants in Anderson. Noblesville has still not recovered from the shutdown of the Firestone plant that was declared a Superfund site by the EPA. 15 years later. This is a permanent injury to the greater LaPel property, the aquifer systems that lie below it. And then this proposed use is just not consistent with the zoning district in which it is located in the town of LaPel's comprehensive plan. Respectfully, I disagree with the staff assessment on this, we're taking the general industrial and fitting it in just because our comprehensive plan doesn't address it. Maybe the comprehensive plan should address it before we decide to start placing things within the middle of a light industrial on a major corridor and thoroughfare into the city. So in summary, asking this board on behalf of remonstrators that I represent, to deny this petition for a couple of reasons. Either number one, because the board agrees and finds that it doesn't have authority. I suspect the board won't do that, and I understand why. There are legal reasons why. Number two, reject the application because it doesn't comply with the town of LaPel's own ordinance. And number three, specifically, that the applicant, whose burden it is to provide all of this proof and this evidence, has failed to meet the 4 criteria necessary to permit special use. If you find that they have not submitted sufficient evidence on any of those 4 items, you must reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cates, for your presentation. Next will be, I believe it's Tom Craigler.
How's that?
Yes.
Perfect. All right.
water's a real problem in this whole country. And blue water is the clean water, the percentage of clean water that comes off the surface and drainage. And this is not helping the problem a bit. And, I wasn't aware of this catch-all back here on the backside, west side of our property. But that's just creating a whole new problem. I've run this creek since I was 6 years old. I know that ground. 25 to 30 acres of it floods because of drainage. Well, that pond's gonna cut off 3 field tiles running into that ditch. I don't know whether you know it or not. They probably never even checked it. But that's no place for a pond, because once that gets water in, it's gonna back up and drains on everybody's property south. All the corners in Madison County stand in water because the drainage system's terrible. And that's just creating another problem. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next is Kim De La Bastille. If I messed your name up, I'm sorry.
You're doing okay.
Thank you.
I've heard it worse. So actually, my question is for Jeff Brown. So the board could put a condition of a performance bond on this company, could they not?
Sure. Any reasonable condition, that this board has this statutory and workers authority to do so.
So if they wanted to put a performance bond based on future damage to the aquifer, they could do that?
Yeah, anything that would be considered reasonable, this board can, add as a condition of approval.
Thank you, that was my question.
Thank you, Mr. Is it actually Bastille? All right, next is Christy Worthman.
I just had a couple quick questions. The first was going back to what Oksana said, just asking for some clarification. I think she said one of the uses that was prohibited was storing scrap metal. Curious how these carcasses that are gonna sit for 400 to 500 days in the yard are not scrap metal when that's their intended purpose without modification anyway. The second question that I had was, would the board consider requiring an independent tester that would be contracted by the board but paid for by LKQ to do secondary environmental stormwater testing, groundwater testing? And then the third question would be, what do we do when LKQ decides that this site is no longer a site they want to operate? What happens if they go out of business, or in 20 years the EPA restrictions are such that their business is no longer viable and they shut it down? What do we do with it then? Which I guess was the same question that the attorney asked.
Thank you, Rusty. Any more questions? Our first question.
Yeah. How is storage of the carcasses not considered scrap metal?
Yes. Say it again.
How is the storage of car carcasses not considered scrap metal?
Okay. So again, junkyard definition, a place usually outdoors where waste or discarded property other than organic matter, including but not limited to automobiles and farm implements and trucks, is accumulated and is or may be salvaged for reuse or resale. This shall not include any industrial scrap metal yard. The storage, dealing in, or the permitting of the accumulation of significant quantities of combustible, organic, or non-metal scrap materials, such as, but not limited to, wood, paper, rags, garbage, tires, bones, and shattered glass on the premises of such an establishment will disqualify from being classified as a scrap metal yard, and the same will be classified as a junkyard. And then per lapel studio definitions, junk is defined as scrap material, including but not limited to the following: automotive or machinery, equipment, or parts, including used automotive tires. Then the list goes on, and then it says wrecked and or dismantled automotives. So because I see these two items listed as considered to be junk, then junkyard means that it assumes that automotive or machinery equipment or parts, as well as wrecked and or dismantled automotives, would be able to be stored on site. I have a feeling that there might be also a separate definition of what a scrap metal yard is in the lapel UDR. I would have to double check that as well.
Okay. The second question was, would a third-party environmental study basically be allowed, be paid for by LKQ prior to this, considering prior
No,
to doing it or
ongoing.
ongoing?
So for example, if LKQ says we're doing EPA testing and this is what the results are that we're logging, would Lapel be willing to contract an independent third party to verify that? That is, we are contracting them, but LKQ's paying for it, reimbursing
So would that be an option that a third-party environmental study could be done, that the town would make the contracts with, that LKQ would actually pay for it?
And that goes back to Ken's question as well. The Board of Zoning Appeals, if they would approve the project, but any condition that's considered to be reasonable. Reasonable is the fun word lawyers use to try to argue with each other. But you could, anything that's related to the project itself, and the special use that has a reason based in rationality, which I think that one would, that the board can attach that as a condition. Doesn't have to, but it can.
I'll just add, just so that we understand what, for example, item can do versus what conditions we can add on. It is my understanding that item inspects these facilities sometimes at will. They said sometimes, right? It's not a regular scheduled inspection. Also, obviously, there is if someone suspects that there might be a spill and they're reporting to item, they will go out. So the kind of, I think, testing that is proposed would be something kind of above what item does. And so if you would like to add it as a condition, that would be in addition to, right? This is just a clarification of, because I don't want to step on anyone's feet. I also want to make sure that we understand what item can do versus, what we would request extra.
Thank you. And then the third question, and I'm assuming Jeff can probably answer this one, and that is, what happens when LKQ basically discontinues business? Who pays for the cleanup? I think that was kind of addressed in one of the other questions, but you could kind of restate that.
The BZA could require a decommissioning bond, and we see those up. Those are fairly common animals when it comes to any kind of industrial project, or I know on in the northern part of the county, that was a major issue of contention on the solar farm up there. That what's the amount of the decommissioning bond out? What type of bond? Things of that nature. So no, that's because while the town can certainly find that, well, now you're in violation, well, unless there's money to clean up the problem, then for whatever reason, years from now, any industrial prospect is gone, how are you gonna pay for the thing? It'd be nice to have a bond involved.
Okay. That was the completion of those looking to speak from the public. Again, keep doing this position, I'm gonna have to lean on Jeff as far as guidance, as to exactly where we go next here.
Well, my thought would be, and I'll give you some options, one of the things you can vote on it at this point, and you can vote to make certain findings of fact. First off, let me back up just a little bit. Not everybody is lucky enough to be in a lot of BZA hearings like this, but what the petitioner and the public both are entitled to a decision of the board within a reasonable period of time. What is a reasonable period of time? 2 years would not be reasonable, but you don't have to do it in one meeting either. Regardless of whether you approve or deny, you must make findings of fact. You have to hit all 4 of these slots. They don't all have to necessarily agree. For instance, just as an example, you could ultimately deny the special use, but you could find that the petitioner hits 3 of the slots, or 2 of the slots, or 1 of the slots. But regardless, if you approve or deny, you must make findings on all 4. You are entitled, and then of course, as we've discussed quite a bit, you can add conditions to the findings of fact based on the approval. If you deny, you don't have to put conditions, you deny it. But what you can do is you could continue this hearing into a date certain. You could go to your next month's meeting, which I'm not sure when this is, or a date before that, in which you put in everyone that's here on notice, the petitioner on notice of when that would be, so you don't have to send out the cards and the notice again, and invite everybody to come back. I mentioned the solar farm, my favorite case of all time, in the northern part of the county. That one took almost a year to get through. Now, that was a bigger property area and affected more people directly than this project. So, there were more people that showed up even than the great turnout we've had here today. But you can continue that into your next meeting. It gives the petitioner the opportunity. There were a few excellent questions from both the board and the folks here today. We didn't know. The staff didn't know. The lawyer certainly didn't know, and the petitioner didn't know. So that would give an opportunity to address those questions and get a little bit of back and forth. We can't take this thing out months and months and months, but can you bump it to the next meeting and get those questions answered? Yes.
Okay. So if we were to decide to continue this, we would not have to address all 4 of the items tonight, or do we still need to address those tonight?
If you continue the hearing, my recommendation is you don't address any of them, because what you're doing, this is effectively, a Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial body. You don't get to put on robes, and you're not held to the same standard that a judge is, but you're supposed to be impartial. So what a continuance is, we're going to continue the trial, we're going to hit pause, and we're going to come back, and we're going to hear more evidence, or put more conditions, ask more questions of the petitioner. You've gotten hundreds of pages of documents today. You should read it. You should review the record.
Yes. All right, so with that, I would ask the BZA members here if there is either a motion to go through the 4 different items, findings of fact worksheet. If we would prefer to have a continuance, or if we're ready to go as a disapproval of this petition. Any questions or comments from
Point of
BZA
order.
members? Where does this to the BZA members? Yeah.
I just soon get this thing voted and get it over with. It's water, it's what we need. It's pure right now.
I totally understand where everybody's coming from out here. Like Mr. Graham we said, we were given 2 big handouts tonight of information. And as far as voting on that, it's up to the zoning board as to whether the voting is this evening or not, or whether we continue. So I would ask from the zoning board members for either a motion to continue, to approve, or disapprove. If we have a motion to approve, we need to go through the 4
answer all the questions that were provided by the public.
We can do that.
Yeah, not tonight.
He obviously, the petitioner, regardless of what we do, has to have an opportunity for what's called rebuttal and
Right.
trial, something like that, to address
Right.
the concerns of the folks involved.
Okay.
That doesn't have to be tonight if the board wants to continue.
Right.
I
And
understand
it-
the time, so yeah, no problem. I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Any,
I think with the, material that we have been given, I think that with the material we have been given to, oversee and, read, I think we ought to have a continuance of this meeting for the BZA until our next meeting, rather than, voting for, approval or dismissal. So I recommend that we continue this until our next meeting, next month,
Which is on October 16th.
which is on October 16th.
I'll second that.
We have a second. All,
Herschel's made a motion, we have a continuation until the next BZA meeting, which is scheduled for October 16th. I thought I had it in my calendar, and I don't think that was the date that I had. But it is, okay. I've got 2 weeks of, where I'm gonna be out of town, and I'm just thinking I had a conflict. So, a continuation of this meeting, this hearing, to the next regularly scheduled BZA meeting, which is for October 16th. We have a second from Ron Nunley. Paula, roll call.
Yeah, we can move to, it can be any date certain, we just have to provide the people that are here and the petitioner with the date and time and the place, so they'll know where to come.
Fall break for a little high school, so I recommend another week.
And based on it being fall break, there are several of the kids in the schools. I know that we went a week later, the 23rd, I will be out of town on business for my work. So we can either go earlier, the 9th, that is Columbus Day. It's not a big deal for most people, it is a government holiday, so, but, I don't have a problem with meeting on the 9th if the others on the board are in agreement.
okay,
Okay, so we'll amend your, motion to have the continuation on October the 9th. Same time, 6 o'clock here at the, station if it's available, we'll have to confirm that. All right. Roll call, Paula?
Cam,
Yes.
Ron,
yes.
Herschel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Jeff.
No, thank you.
Yeah, or to continue, one not to continue. So we will have that meeting on the 9th. With that, I think we can close the hearing and adjourn our meeting.
Take an official, motion to adjourn.
And motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn, have a second? Cam seconded.
Hey, Tim. Tim?
Yes.
Will the public be able to get those materials that were like those booklets?
There's copies up
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's, we'll probably have copies at town hall, I would assume, that we can review. And as far as making extra copies, so that's a lot of pages to scan, so I don't know.
Can you stand on the line, digital? I can speak to that real quick. Usually I post everything online, so for example, we'll just prepare the next agenda. I will post everything that we've gotten so far today, so that you guys can start moving it now. Now that we have the meeting and the date there, I'll just create an agenda and we'll post everything. And then, again, to the end, because it goes to the BZA, it has to be submitted through me to
actually got a vote on adjourning the meeting, so, hearing all in favor of adjourning the meeting? Yes.